gave a great leeway for us to bring Natalie into the conversation. You mentioned the Talanoa Institute, which is doing a great job monitoring policy making in terms of the environment regulations. And Natalie, thanks for waiting, and sorry for keeping you on the backstage for so long. But you guys have been monitoring the so-called reconstruction of Brazil's environmental apparatus. And like Luisa said, it has been slower than some anticipated. What has the government done so far, according to your assessment?
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you also, Luisa, for bringing that up. I think it's not new to anyone here that Bolsonaro's government was one of capacity breaking, right? It really disestablished the environmental institutions, the climate policies, so on and so forth. They were partially successful because they were not able to reveal the constitution of Brazil. If they have been done that, then we would have an even bigger problem. But the issue was that according to our tracking, and we've done monitoring systematically on a daily basis of all the executive orders, all the decrees, everything that has been done by the previous government, there would be 473 orders that should be undone or redone by a new government, right? And basically, this in the first days of Lula and Alckmin's government, there's been a lot of intensity. We saw very important measures and decisions being taken by the president himself, including, for instance, activating a very large operation in the Yanomami land in the border of Brazil and Venezuela. That was absolutely critical, I would say, part of an unavoidable agenda, right? And among some of the measures that were taken. But then after this first important and good positive first days, what we saw was a sort of slowdown, not only in terms of the volume of decisions that were made, but also we saw that no policy started to be developed. So basically what we have after 100 days of government is that only 5% of the overall package of decisions that were important to make only in the environmental and climate areas were taken. Basically, amongst the 112 of the most immediate urgent ones, only 12%. And that's because I don't think it's a lack of willingness or political willingness to do so, but it's really a lack of organization, and also a signal that the sabotage that was perpetrated by the previous government was deep and very efficient. Just to sort of finalize this first comment, Gustavo, it's interesting to note that new ministries such as the indigenous peoples one, the human rights one, that don't have to rebuild anything, they are moving quite fast and forward, right? They are taking decisions, they are putting people in place, appointing and doing what's expected from them. Whereas the Ministry of the Environment, for instance, and I think both Bruna and Luis already pointed out, it's been underwhelming because the people are not there. They don't have the pen. So nobody can really develop policy, right? I'm confident that is going to happen at some point. I don't think they're going to be, that they won't reverse the problems that were inherited from Bolsonaro. But the issue is really about timing. We know that this government has basically 2 years to get things done. Otherwise, we may see a far right government also back in the game and trying to get elected again. So I think the time is the biggest enemy here. And so far, this government has been really slow in really in really using the time wisely and efficiently.
Luis, I'm sorry I cut you the last time. Do you want to continue your, and then you and Natalie can go about the climate policies in the Lula administration and why it has been so slow.
No, I was looking to the international aspect of those of this agenda. So I think is important to make the to try to resume all that happened in this past 3 months, and like there's some important announcements that are aligned with some of the recommendations of the transition team, and also the promise that Lula made during the campaign. So reactivating the South-South cooperation, and inside this, inside the South-South cooperation, bring the environmental aspect. So we have Brazil, Congo, and Indonesia that signed the agreement for Rainforest Protection Pact. This was in November during the Bali G20. So and it's being discussed for 10 years, so not exactly an accomplishment of the new administration, but there is a political will of the new administration, and the dialogue is happening, even though we don't know exactly how this mechanism for conservation will operate. We don't know how all the details about how they will facilitate result-based payment to reduce deforestation. So there are a lot of questions about this mechanism. At least I do have a lot of questions about this mechanism. But we also have the summit of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization that now has a date. It will happen in the beginning of August. We'll bring together all the 8 Amazonian country leaders, and is this initiative that Lula is counting on to have a regional position about Amazonian protection, and he will bring this shared vision to the UN General Assembly in September here in New York. So that's the plan. And also the Belém is now this summit will happen in Belém, but also Belém is now a candidate city officially to host the COP30 in 2025, which was another promise. So it's like to conclude the announcements, the major announcements of this 100 days, or pass back to you, Gustavo.
And
Gustavo,
Natalie, sure.
can I add something on follow up on what Natalie mentioned and Luisa, which I think is important. One is, I think one of the things that we always talk about when we see Brazil and the US looking at each other in the mirror as like big democracies is we have to figure out a way to demonstrate the world that democracies can deliver goods, can deliver things. And that's, it's challenging. And I spent a part of my life in Brazil on the other side of the counter, like in the deep state, meaning like looking at how hard it is to deliver things. Nowadays, when you were talking about internally about policies, delivering, especially the environmental policies, it's the same as if you were like rebuilding the whole plumbing system at the same time of a house, at the same time you were building the second floor. So Lula has to basically like rebuild a number of like a structure to implement and enforce and deliver certain things, which is one aspect that we have to look at closely. In figuring out how to do that in a world where he has like all the fiscal constraints that he has, all the political constraints that he has, will be challenging. And we talk a lot about the whys and whats in policy here, and especially at the think tank level, but we don't look that much to the how aspect of things. And that's where our ambivalences like emerge. So when we were talking about, for example, foreign policy and the fact that we believe that Brazil can play a role in being influential environmental steward and a regional leader, and even perhaps like a global peacemaker and having a role in that, I think it also relates to how we are actually thinking about how we are doing this. In terms of foreign policy, of course, the rhetoric and all the messages being sent matter a lot. And when it comes to the environmental and social policies, what concerns me a lot is the fact that the Brazilian state has today been like postponing reforms, such as an administrative reform that could enable certain delivering certain things, and also has been postponing putting like more thought on how to actually redesign institutions to be more agile and delivering things faster. So that's one aspect that's not as perhaps interesting to talk about because it's sometimes boring and bureaucratic, but we have to when we are thinking about getting results faster.
And that brings me to my question to Natalie, because this ambivalence, and like you said, it's like doing plumbing while building the second floor. Lula has at the same time pledged to zero Amazon deforestation by the end of the decade. But at the same time, he said that he wants to unclog development in Brazil through a lot of infrastructure work. And God knows we do need infrastructure work in Brazil. But a recent study shows that dozens of indigenous lands and dozens of preservation areas would be at risk, would be put at risk by several infrastructure works that are on the government's plan, not necessarily just this one. But and then we have, for instance, also Petrobras that recently pledged to drill oil in the equatorial margin as one of its business priorities, which is one part of this equatorial margin comprehends the mouth of the Amazon River. So, Natalie, how do you see the government balancing these risks and rewards in terms of its infrastructure goals and its climate goals?
Gustavo, thank you for the question. I think it's very good. And let me just separate the environment and the climate aspects here, just because when we talk about environmental potential environmental impacts over indigenous peoples, for instance, coming from infrastructure, Brazil has the framework in place to deal with it. We have regulations for consulting indigenous peoples. We do have licensing, right? So it's about really using this framework and making sure, differently from what happened in the past with Belo Monte Dam, for instance, making sure this is going to be used and respected from the technical and the political point of view. But when it comes to climate change, and I think it's, I like the question that you posed because I listened to Lula's speech today, and it was really, really concerning from my point of view that he didn't connect the points. He spoke about infrastructure development several times. Then he spoke about climate as if we were living in a different planet, right? If you had the planet infrastructure and the planet climate. And that's a big issue. We can't, no country in this planet can afford building infrastructure that is not resilient, that is not going to be, sustain itself in a warmer and less stable climate. That's point number one. Point number two, we do need infrastructure, but what kind of? What kind of? And then comes Petrobras, and it's been very interesting to hear the various voices from this government, Lula, Marina Silva, and then the president of Petrobras, Jean Paul Prates, that has been saying they're pointing in different directions, and particularly Jean Paul Prates recently said that they're going to develop infrastructure or development to this government from the Petrobras standpoint is about opening new oil fields in the mouth of the Amazon River. Despite many technical and political and economic already signals that that's not the way forward. So this government, it's very positive that it does not want to be a pariah anymore. We are very happy about that. It's good to have a government that is not a proud pariah as the former one. Great. But then when it comes to coming to terms with rebuilding Brazil's credibility with sustainability, which was the sentence that we heard Tatiana Prazeres several times today. We need them to define with society what the sustainability is about. It's not defined. It's Lula and his ministers have been talking to a lot of different partners: China, the US, Europe, Norway, so on and so forth. Also very good. But there is no coherent strategy. There's no grand strategy so far. And then these ambiguities, and moreover, this I don't think it's only controversial. I think it's counterproductive when you have like one country saying one thing and then pointing to a very different direction. I think it can do harm to Brazil because it can be sustained for 1 year, not for 4, not for 8. And then getting back to your point on the zero deforestation commitment, it's a very important one. And the test is 2025. So although Lula and all other politicians have been speaking about getting to zero by 2030, which is already very ambitious, but we have to bear in mind that the test is 2025. It's when Brazil has to show to the world that it has diminished its emissions according to the climate targets presented before the Paris Agreement. And also, we have to then try to combine the international and the domestic policies. So far, there's no coherence, there's no cohesion. And as I mentioned, I do believe that these ambiguities, they can do harm, not now, but in the medium term, in terms of attracting investments, in terms of proving our credibility for trade, so on and so forth. So very complex situation, and I don't think the 100 days have provided us a very clear picture on who is going to win in this balance of forces within the government and within the political landscape, I would say.
And Natalie, one thing that I found a little bit shocking is that Marina Silva, in a recent interview, compared the equatorial margin to Belo Monte, and Belo Monte was one of the reasons why she left the Lula government a decade ago, right? So that's like you said, people are not on the same page on that, and a little bit eye-opening.
Yeah, if I may, just one sentence more, Gustavo and all. When we talk about energy transition, we are all talking about phasing out fossil fuels at some point. We have to reckon that. We have to recognize that and really make that policies, even if long-term policies. I'm not saying that Petrobras should stop drilling oil today. It's not about that. It requires a lot of planning and real transition plans, but we cannot increase oil production and actually open the mouth of the Amazon for that, and at the same time say that you are in line with the Paris Agreement. These two things, they cannot happen at the same time.
We'd like to introduce you to our latest release, our exclusive report on the first 100 days of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's third term as Brazilian president. Lula's 100 Days, Myriad Challenges and Unforced Errors is a valuable strategic tool that brings you in-depth analysis from our experts on the most important issues from the beginning of Lula's administration. In this exclusive report, you'll find insights and analysis on the government's support base in Congress, Brazil's return to foreign policy, fiscal, economic and environmental challenges, as well as how the administration is tackling social media regulation and planning to fight hunger. Don't miss this opportunity and use the coupon to get a 20% discount on the report. Enjoy your read.